right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today. It is Wednesday. Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. Gosh, I told you I can't ever remember my days. It is indeed Wednesday. Yesterday I did the program about Also Brooks. Is there any hope for her to be a progressive? Discussed a little bit how Jamie Raskin supports her, and the day before was Arlen, Monday with Arlen. So yes, of course, today would be Wednesday. Most days I really like doing, always like doing the program. I really do. And I've said Wednesdays usually put a little wind in my sail because, it's, we're halfway through the work week, and this is for sure my work. This is my job. This is my career. And I'm very, very, very fortunate, nay, I would say privileged to be able to do this. I hope it becomes, a money center for me, a little bit of a wage coming out of it. So far, not yet. But if we keep getting new subscriptions at some point, I would be able to generate a little bit of income, a little bit of cash. Now, I know there's a cost to you if that happens. And the cost is ads, right? Right now you'd have to watch ads. And sometimes I watch those YouTube videos and there are so many ads. They're horrible. They come in all the time. I can't stand them. So if that becomes too onerous, or if, at some point, it's a problem I hope I have, or a problem I hope you have at some point. But if we get to that place, then I'll, where it becomes a problem that there are, intrusive ads, I'll look into that and see if there's a way around it. But for now, enjoy Halitics ad-free completely. I mentioned I like doing the program, but it can be a real downer. And today is one of those days. Focus is going to be on the climate holocaust. But I always, of late, since Israel began its genocidal campaign against the Palestinians, and specifically those living in Gaza, I have really tried to center their experiences, their suffering, because it's so raw, so real, so wrong. And it's something we absolutely must stand together against, right? What's the point of civilization? What's the point of the Enlightenment if we can't at least on occasion unite against evil? And I don't know what could be more evil. Famine-stricken Gaza. The death count keeps getting higher. It's 78 when this was published in the past 24 hours at Al Jazeera a couple of hours ago. The previous 24 hours, we had 46, and the previous 24 hours, 45, including the many civilians murdered at the refugee camp, which Netanyahu calls a tragic mistake. The U.S. government, our president, the Democratic elected, the Democratic and democratically elected president, the commander-in-chief doesn't know which weapons that we supplied Israel were used to kill innocent civilians. I'm past the point where I can vote for him. And I hope you are there too. The only way we can change the trajectory of our country, of our world, is by not supporting the Democratic Party anymore. Now, of course, we shouldn't support the Republicans. But there will be no change in the duopoly. Indeed, it will only get worse unless we just simply say, we're not going to vote for you. You have to change. And vote for an alternative. The Green Party is the alternative. Now, I get it. The Democratic Party would much rather, I think, stay the way it is and lose than become better. And I think that's why really we need an alternative, why there's really no other option. There's no other plan B. The only plan B is the Green Party or some other third party. Green Party seems the only one that's even remotely viable, and not very. But we're going down the wrong path, a very, very bad, very, very dangerous, very, very dark. We're in a dark place right now as a country. We really, there's just no other way to spin it, to look at it. And it isn't just what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, but that's the biggest, most obvious example of where we are as a nation, and it's not a good place. All right, if you want to join me, 240-242-5646. It was great to hear from Triple G yesterday. Don't know if you're a new listener, if you're a new subscriber, Triple G, but it was great to hear from you, and I always want to talk to people because the goal here is to together try to resolve our issues, try to come up with some solutions, some suggestions that may make things a little bit better, especially for the people who are in the worst possible place. Today's kind of a macro solutions day, so I'm going to talk about a panacea almost. I think it really is a panacea, tax the bads, not the goods, and specifically the worst bad of all right now in terms of what we consume, our fossil fuels. So that is going to be the focus, and I know I've discussed it before, but some more information, some more details, and some graphics that I put together today. I'm not saying they're the world's best, but I did spend some time on them, so I hope you'll enjoy those graphics that I did, and part of the reason, but not the only reason why I'm starting later today than I generally do. 2 o'clock start time today. Yesterday was 1-2 on Mondays with Arlen. Tomorrow should be the back to noon with comic Elizabeth Croydon. She is slated to join me tomorrow, so hopefully we'll have Liz on at noon. But yeah, I've been just, to be honest with you, it's been a little bit hard for me to get going in the morning and get prepped for the program because the news has been just such that I don't want to think about it, look at it, talk about it. So more from Al Jazeera. There you see it. It was in the headline, Gaza, a famine-stricken zone. And more details about, the 78 people that Israel killed in the past 24 hours, 21 of them, at least, including 13 women and girls, in a designated safe zone. So more of those tragic accents that Bibi describes for you with such sympathy and such concern in his voice. And of course, the U.S. government, absolutely complicit. The executive branch, absolutely complicit in this genocide. All right, if you want to join me again, 240-242-5646. I'm going to say, hey, get a chance, please do. Subscribe. There you go. There's the bell. There's the little, it's at the bottom right, blue and white square. If you haven't yet done so, subscribe to Halitics. We keep getting those numbers higher and higher, and we can really break through that algorithm wall that YouTube puts up. And I know Bill Neal, one of my regulars, the historian, who I really appreciate on occasion when he calls out Israel and says we shouldn't be supporting it, and don't like him so much when he says we need boots on the ground in Ukraine. I really don't get that one. But in any event, Bill believes that his views have caused Verizon, I believe, or Comcast, or whichever is his subscriber, maybe YouTube, whichever is his ISP, internet service provider, he being a subscriber of that ISP, he is of the mindset that they may be throttling his emails, trying to prevent him from presenting his message. And, plausibly, he notes that since he started to criticize our Israel policy, he has seen the challenge is getting the emails out. And yes, I get it. I wonder too whether social media, whether big tech is, somehow preventing pro-peace, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist messages from getting out. I think it's certainly plausible. So the way we can cut through that, again, is just more and more subscribers. And yeah, check out Halitics. If you haven't gotten a notification that I'm on the air, you should be getting them, unless you didn't click the bell when you subscribe. But either way, go to the page on YouTube at Halitics. 240-2837. Oh, no. Did I say that? 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. I got so many different phone numbers. I got 2 cell numbers. I got this phone number. I got a home number. I can't keep them all straight. You may be in the same place. I don't want to, well, we talk a lot about Israel. I do. A lot about Gaza, a lot about the plight of the Palestinians at the hands of, being oppressed by, being victimized by, being killed by Israelis. And it is absolutely horrific. We'll get to the climate holocaust, which is, the story that's on a par in terms of how awful it is. But I did want to just kind of, correct the record a little bit in terms of a Facebook post. So I noted this morning while I was reading, and I really got, maybe I should stop doing this, but I've been kind of looking through my Jewish Daily Insider daily update when I read my newspaper, or which I do online. When I read my news, I get these emails from all these different media to which I subscribe. And I do look through the Jewish Daily Insider quite a bit, probably because I'm so focused on the news out of Gaza, out of Palestine, because that's so important to me at this point. And I do want to see what the other side is saying. They are they are touting at Jewish Daily Insider how AIPAC is going after Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. And of course, if you watch my program, if you're a listener, if you're a viewer, could be a listener if you just put your phone in your pocket or something and go for a walk and listen. But if you're a viewer, listener, watcher, whatever you are, you'll know I'm not a fan of really any House Democrat. But I did take notice of the fact that AIPAC is against these two, Bowman and Bush. And that makes me much more inclined to call for their support, to say, yeah, support Bowman and Bush. In fact, I have asked my family members who live in Bowman's district whether they're planning to to again support him in this election cycle. And they do, they will. They're not, they're not extremists like AIPAC by any means. I'm not a fan, right? I'm not a fan of these Democrats. They voted for Hakeem Jeffries, who is an ardent Zionist, who's an ardent pro-Israel voice, who's a big reason, and therefore Bowman and Bush are a big reason that we are supplying Israel with these weapons of mass destruction. They, signed on to Hakeem Jeffries. So they bear some responsibility. I'm not excusing them. But at least their rhetoric is a lot better than that of many other House Democrats, most, virtually all. So rhetoric is of importance. It's not as important as your votes. It's not as important as your actions. But rhetoric has value, and their rhetoric is better, certainly, than most Democrats. So, if I was in their districts, I would vote for them. And a lot of Democrats I won't vote for, but I would vote for Bowman and Bush. And, I know that a big reason you should vote for them is because AIPAC has targeted them. And after all, AIPAC is the enemy of a decent, caring world. They're in favor of mass murder. They're cheerleading mass murder. They're just awful, horrible, evil people at AIPAC. There's no other way to describe them. And so if they're against a candidate, I note, I'm firm, at least a little bit. It's sort of like, the fossil fuel industry and the big bankers largely backed Hillary. She got a lot more money from those industries in 2016 than Trump did. So when I read that, when I knew that, and I mean, that's something I look at when I'm deciding for whom to vote, when I saw how much support Hillary got from these malefactors of great wealth, I thought, well, maybe Trump isn't that bad. And yeah, Trump is that bad, but so is Hillary. So therefore, I couldn't vote for either one. If AIPAC is against, so much like if the big banks are against you, if big tech is against you, if the fossil fuel industry is against you, there's probably something that you're doing right. And they weren't necessarily against Trump, but they were just even more in the tank for Hillary. So there you go. But with regard to AIPAC and Bowman Bush, yeah, I would support them. I do support them. But this particular Facebook post got some pushback from somebody I really care about, who I have great respect for. And they emailed me and they said, you should reconsider that post. And I was like, well, what should I reconsider? And their concern was the language, and you can see it. It's the image where I have the highlighted language. So AIPAC's biggest targets highlighted in light blue. That is actually supposed to be light blue. And then the names Bowman and Bush in yellow. But I include the language which came from Jewish Daily Insider. Of course, I didn't. I just copied and pasted that. Actually, I did a little more than that, but those are all their words. Virulently anti-Israel. And so my friend who took issue with this said, you shouldn't really use that language. It's kind of, it'll send a message to people that isn't true. They're not really virulently anti-Israel. They just are virulently anti-genocide. And I was like, okay, and I thought, well, at first I was dismissive of that email. I was like, nah, come on. No one's going to think that. It's clear I support them, right? I'm saying, well, at least you should vote for them because AIPAC, or you should consider voting for them because AIPAC has this, view. But then I started thinking about it. And yeah, language really does matter. And even if you take, they say, don't think of an elephant, but you said elephant, so people are going to think of an elephant. So if you say virulently anti-Israel, people are going to think that they're virulently anti-Israel, and that may cost them votes. So that's a problem. So I thought first, and I changed it to say quoted from Jewish Daily Insider, but even that wasn't good enough finally. And, I take responsibility. I posted that, so I got to be responsible. But I ultimately changed it, and this is what's up there now. I think this is better. So I took the red marker, so it's clearly not the original, right? And I crossed that of the most virulently anti-Israel, and I changed it to our two pro-peace voices. And I think that's right. And it also sends a very positive message, right? Not only are they AIPAC's biggest targets, but the reason they're AIPAC's biggest targets is their pro-peace voices in Congress. So I think that's the right framing. And I'm sorry I didn't frame it correctly the first time. This is something I'm mindful of, but I get it wrong a lot. So those who correct me, thank you. I would finally just note, this is something really, language is so incredibly important. And we have to use the right language because otherwise we turn people off. That's one of the reasons I brought white privilege. That term, I believe, is much bigger. Well, look, it's a turnoff in terms of people that I think we should be trying to reach and make part of our coalition. There are a lot of, and I said this, it's inaccurate. There are many white people who are not privileged. And the ones who are not privileged, the least privileged, are the ones who are going to be most offended by that term. So language really, really matters. Yeah, there's a lot of privileged white people. And frankly, there are a lot of privileged people of color in the progressive movement. Plenty who aren't. I guarantee you that. I certainly agree. But, many of the people, and I was working, I was part of the progressive movement as a professional staffer at Our Revolution. And I can tell you that the people that were in that organization, I wouldn't say they were privileged. There were some who were, but there were plenty who weren't. But I did see in the progressive movement people who I would definitely denominate as privileged, including myself, right? I'm a white person. I'm privileged. I don't really call myself a beneficiary of white privilege. I think there are other privileges that I have. But the term is going to put off people that we should hope to bring into our coalition. So, and a lot of people who embrace it are people who are themselves privileged. So, no, let's be very, very mindful of language. I'm open for debate about that, but you gotta, if you want to convince me, I want to hear you tell me why you're not going to be turning off white working class voters if you use that term. You're not going to be turning off, by the way, Obama to Trump voters. People who in 2008 said, yeah, I want some hope. I want some change. Well, we've gotten, since Ronald Reagan hasn't worked out well for me, This guy's talking about healthcare. This guy's talking about jobs. I'm going to support him. I don't, black, white, I don't care. Then they turn against Obama because the jobs didn't materialize. The free trade deals continued to be passed. The wars were, maybe ended in Iraq for a time, but they were, started up again in other places like Afghanistan. And the decision was, I'm not going to vote for him anymore. And I'll vote for Trump. Maybe he'll do something differently. Those people, I don't consider them privileged, most of them. And many of them are white. Probably virtually all of the Obama to Trump voters, almost all, not all, but almost all would have been white because Hillary did about as well as Obama when it came to the voters of color. It's only after Hillary where the voters of color started to migrate somewhat to Trump. So again, language really, really matters. Much better to describe Bowman and Cori Bush as pro-peace if you want them to win than anti-Israel. 240, let me get that number right, 242-5646 if you want to join me on Halitics. And today's program, the main topic, I, again, always really center the situation in Palestine, the victims of Israeli aggression, Israeli genocide, really. But I wanted to really spend a good chunk of time, maybe the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, talking about the fossil fuel-caused sixth grade extinction, the climate holocaust. And this is from NOAA. You probably know, if you've been watching my live stream, if you've seen any of my videos, that 2023 was the hottest recorded year going back 150 years. And one of the arguments you hear from people all the time is, well, okay, but the Earth is a lot older than 150 years, so what about, 10 million, 20 million? There have been hotter years. Yes, but we're seeing a steady, sustained rise that's accelerating in temperatures on Earth, and it is unprecedented. We have not seen anything like this. And we can't even, going back into the fossil record, model this kind of dramatic change in temperatures that has resulted directly because of the injection. And Tom Harmon, I always give him credit for this. He explained it to me in his book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. All that sequestered carbon that came out of the atmosphere over hundreds of millions of years, all that sequestered carbon, which was absorbed by plants and, and then ultimately sequestered under the ground when the plants died, that is all being burned up and put into the atmosphere in a nanosecond in terms of the Earth's age. So that's what's causing the rapid heat rise and so many problems for so many people and species, of course. So this is something we have to do something about. And we're not making things better. We have not managed to reduce overall globally consumption. I think maybe, I could be wrong, 2020 was the first year ever, maybe, where the consumption of fossil fuels was less than the year before. But once the COVID pandemic began to subside and the government controls on job opening, when jobs could be open and transportation, all that, at that point, we began to burn more and more fossil fuels. And this is planet-wise, not necessarily country by country. In fact, the United States has slightly reduced over the past few years, as has Canada, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But part of that is also because we've offshored a lot of our manufacturing. So some of the reduction in our onshore fossil fuel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, is because we're producing, or goods are being produced for our markets in Asia and other countries, and they're the ones who are burning fossil fuels to produce them. And in fact, that exacerbates the problem, because you add not just the production energy that's being used, but also the added energy required to transport the goods. Transportation, the number one energy sector, energy consuming sector. So I asked a question on Facebook because I don't think we're talking about this anymore, are we? I haven't seen a lot of discussion. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the environmental crisis isn't getting a lot of media attention these days, even though it couldn't be any worse. It's the worst it's ever been. The Earth is hotter than it's ever been. At least many thousands of years. And some scientists are saying maybe 60 million years, 70 million years. But we don't really know, right? I mean, we can't really know, but to the best that they can determine. But I'm not seeing a lot, right, about this. So I asked that question on Facebook. Haven't seen any responses yet. Would love to see some. As our Mother Earth's essential systems start to flatline, we're discussing them less frequently. Have we just given up any real hope? Should we have? Should we have hope? Should we not have hope? I'd like to hear from you on that. 240-242-5646. One of the arguments I read from some environmentalists when they're confronted with the gloomiest and doomiest news is we can't give up hope. We don't want to let, tell people just how bad it is. A lot of environmentalists are saying it's worse than we think. Right? I mean, the predictions generally have understated the seriousness. One of the major takeaways from Paris 2016 was that a hard target should be no rise above 2 degrees centigrade or Celsius, same thing, from pre-industrial levels. But we really need to try to keep it below 1.5. We've already shot past 1.5. 2023 was 1.5 degrees hotter than pre-industrial levels globally. And we are now hotter, right? We're hotter now than we were in 2023. What did I say? Did I say it wrong? 2023 was 1.5 degrees Celsius hotter than pre-industrial levels. So we were last year at that sort of bottom line target set in Paris 8 years ago, 2015, 2016. And now we're above that because 2024, as you saw from the caption from NOAA, is even hotter than 2023. So it's awful. What do we do? What can we do? Is there anything we can do? And I'd say, individually, there isn't much. I've said don't have kids, right? I mean, I say don't have kids, not primarily because children are fossil fuel burners, right? I mean, the more people on the planet, the more fossil fuels we consume. So if you have fewer children, we'll burn less fuel. I mean, that's true. That's a given. But that's not my primary reason for saying don't have kids. My primary reason is because it's so awful that we have to foresee the dirty gray planet that they're going to inhabit. But yeah, if you're rich, if you're privileged, if you've got millions of dollars or more, then I really say don't have kids because they're the ones who consume the most. But of course, their lives won't be as bad. They'll be able to avoid the least, the worst impacts. So to me, it's easy. If you're not rich, you don't want to have kids because their world is going to be really bad and they're not going to be able to avoid the ever hotter temperatures, the implications of the 6th great extinction, just the sadness of knowing you're living in end times. And then, of course, if you're wealthy, then you're going to be seeing your kids exacerbating the problem even more so. Remember what a friend of mine once said when I said, don't you ever think about maybe it's not a good idea to have kids? And the response was, well, there's still enough goodies left in the piñata, right? Which is a good way to look at it. It's accurate, right? There's this earth, you're banging it, we're banging it around, we're knocking it out, we're taking all the good things out of it and leaving an empty husk, like a piñata. It's true, But I don't really want to, think of my kids as the ones who are grabbing those last goodies while others are going without. That's not something that makes me feel real good. So that's my advice. 240-242-5646. We as individuals can only do very little, right? I mean, we can recycle. Not sure that does any good at all. We can reduce. We can reuse. That does some good. There's little things we can do. We can vote for progressive candidates, but there really aren't any. I haven't heard any, right? I mean, the Democratic meme is gas tax of gasoline is too expensive, right? We got to vote for a Democrat to keep the price low. And Republicans make the same stupid argument. Well, of course, we need higher gas taxes, not lower. The answer, ultimately, the only real long-term solution is a fossil fuels tax. Really, and I call it a fossil fuel because it's for all fuel, right? It's all fossil fuels: coal, natural gas, petroleum. We've got to stop consuming it. It's toxic. It's destroying our world. There's nothing good about it. It's a cheap source of energy, so I guess that is good, right? But because of that, that's why it's so bad, because it's a cheap source of energy. That's what's so bad about it. It's cheap. Well, it's bad because it's cheap because it's super concentrated and dense and heavy in terms of the amount of energy. Actually very light because there's an extraordinary amount of calories per pound. But that's what the problem is. That's what's destroying our planet. So I put together this very, very rudimentary, very, very simplistic Econ 101 chart, which kind of helps me think about why a carbon tax is so important, why it's so valuable. And I'll just go through it super quick. So I've got 4 lines there. I've got 2 supply lines and I've got 2 demand lines. The supply lines are what the producers, the extractors, the production industry faces, what determines how much they actually produce. And then the demand lines are what consumers want, what consumers demand. And so it's sort of like a rotated tic-tac-toe board. And obviously I didn't even put numbers on there because I would just be making them up. But the point is, we want to move as far to the left on that chart as possible, because output consumption is the problem. The more that's produced, consumed, the worse the climate crisis. So we want to move from right to left. And this chart kind of shows us how we do it. The arrow, the lines, not the arrow, there is an arrow, the lines that go higher on the right, that go from left up right, those are the actual supply, lines that the producers face to determine how much they're going to produce. And as you can see, the higher the price on the left, the more they'll produce, which makes perfect sense. When prices go up for a commodity, the supply will go up. Whenever something becomes more valuable, producers will scramble to make more of it. So when the price, and by the way, that price is the price that is actually paid to the oil company or the coal company or the gas company. It is not what you pay yourself. That can change based on a tax. So the price is what the consumer pays. No, what the price is what goes to the company, not what the consumer pays. So green is what we face now. That is the farthest to the right. At any one price point, you see more consumption, more production, more output at any given price. You move from left to right, from the light blue to green. That's what we face now, the green. That's output with subsidies. because we actually pay the energy industry in all myriad ways to produce more fossil fuels. Rights of way for, the government. A perfect example is that Mountain Valley Pipeline. All these rights of way were granted to the producer, the manufacturer of that pipeline. And they're able to just simply go right through people's property, where they might have had to pay many millions of dollars. But instead, the state just said, we're going to set a price and you're going to take it. And that oil company is going to build that pipeline. Whichever oil company it is. I can't remember. Is it New Era, I think? One of them. There's several. So that's a subsidy. The government is helping that pipeline company. That makes the price cheaper. It would have cost them more in a truly free and fair market. So the green line is the output with subsidies. More is produced at any price point because it costs less. The actual cost to the energy company is less than it would otherwise be. So they're going to produce more. The gray line is without the subsidies. So you remove the subsidies, they'll produce less. So that's a positive. You want to get rid of the subsidies, we reduce production. The two lines, the pink and the yellow, represent the demand curves. The demand curve without tax, virtually nil. There's virtually no consumption tax today. It's what is it, a couple cents? I don't know, nothing. So that's yellow. And you can see that's pretty far to the right, meaning more output. But if you put a tax on it, then at any given price that the energy company, the oil company gets, people will consume less. So the solution is high taxes, no subsidies. That is the efficient market way to reduce consumption. It's the only thing we can do to solve this problem. The only way. Now, I see Shade is criticizing me and saying because I have a Tesla, I don't understand how important energy prices are. So I'll jump forward because I want to respond to that. In Canada, they're doing what I call for. They are taxing. There's a federal tax on fossil fuels. And that fossil fuels tax is indeed returned. The revenues from that tax are indeed returned. 90% of them, and let me give you this. This is from Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll show you the slide right now because I always hear this argument and I find it so frustrating when I always point out rich people consume more energy than poor. So if you return the revenues from the tax, because rich people consume more, when you return the revenues from the tax, and also this doesn't include even the money that corporations pay, because they'll be paying that tax too, and that money will be rebated to the people too. But if you use less, and poor people use less, then you wind up ahead. You get more back than you put in. And this is from Citizens Climate Lobby. Canada's carbon pricing law, which went into effect in 2018, features an annually rising carbon price, very low. 80% of households come out ahead when receiving the rebate. Most families in Canada spend less on the tax. They pay less in than they get out because a small number of households, very wealthy people who fly, who drive big gas guzzlers like Hummers and the like, who live in big houses that require more heating, more cooling, they're paying a lot more in than everybody else. So therefore, the average and lower income Canadians are ahead. They come out ahead as a result of this tax. I say this over and yet for some reason, people, I guess they don't believe it is the only thing. And that's why I was pleased that I was able to find this, and I kind of mad at myself that I didn't know it beforehand. I didn't know about Canada, but they did this study in Canada. And here's more. This really lays it out. So for households below 50% income, you can see the great majority are blue. That means the rebate, it says it right there. I can't say it any clearer. The rebate that lower income Canadian families get is greater than they're paying in. Rebate exceeds costs. This is a progressive solution. So if you care about poor people, if you care about struggling people, if you care about working class people, then you should embrace this because it results in a higher net income, real income for less affluent families when you return that revenue from the tax to the consumer. You just have to return it on an per capita, not based on how much you consume. If you live in an area where people drive a lot, you don't get more. You can't reward people in any way for using more energy. And then you're incentivizing truly efficient, meaning low energy consumption behavior. All right, so I see all this stuff from Shay. Draconian measures do more harm than good. Okay, well, we just saw that a fossil fuels tax, at least in Canada, does more good than harm. And another thing I would just say, we don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, this is too extreme. We've got to nibble around the edges. Maybe a few subsidies to solar panel producers will solve the problem. We don't have the luxury of doing that. We've blown by the numbers called for in Paris. We have to do something different because what we're doing now isn't working. Now, I would say this isn't working good enough. It is working a little bit. You can see that. There's the Canadian number. They imposed the tax in 2018, and consumption dropped a little bit, not much. I mean, you already saw it was already dropping before that carbon tax. Now, to be fair, various provinces were taking steps before 2018. So this was more a national effort. But you do see a drop. But to me, this isn't that significant because it's kind of goes along with the trend. And 2020, yes, was the big drop year. But of course, we talked about that. 2020 is the COVID year. And then you see numbers starting to go back up again. And part of the problem, well, the problem, I don't say part, the reason that this hasn't been more effective, it's very, very simple. There's just one reason alone. It's not high enough. The tax just is very, very simply way too low. And I'll demonstrate that in a moment. But I mean, the cost of energy in Canada's a petro state. Canada is an oil producing country, and they're not going to, really take on their fossil fuel industry. But that is the reason this hasn't led to a much better result is quite simply they haven't put a high enough tax on their fossil fuels. And I'll get to that in just a second. But again, if you want to join me, 240-242-5646, not a draconian solution, the only solution that works. Let's look at the U.S. So we just saw there's been a drop in Canada. But U.S. too, we're seeing a drop. The problem is it's not enough. It's noticeable, but it's not sufficient given the scope of the problems we face right now as a result of an ever hotter planet, because we keep emitting more fossil fuel emissions in the third, in developing nations. So we're not really seeing, and it doesn't matter for the biosphere where the fossil fuel consumption is, whether it's in China, the United States, India, Australia. It doesn't matter. It all goes into that one atmosphere. But there you can see it. Yes, U.S., it's pretty flat, but it's slightly down. And again, you see the same drop in 2020 in U.S. as you do in Canada. So yes to fossil fuels. Yes, to fossil fuel tax. Yes, the tax reduces consumption somewhat. And yes, the tax leads to an improved situation for poor, struggling, working people, which is, incredibly important because we live in an unjust world. So this is all good. But in Canada, the tax is kind of low. But I'll get into how low it is and why it's meaningless almost. But let's just look at a couple of other charts, which I think are really useful. So I mentioned that in other provinces, or in provinces before 2018, they were taking steps to reduce consumption. And I think this chart does a better job of really showing how a meaningful tax can reduce consumption. In British Columbia, they went the other way from Canada. When they imposed that tax in 2008, the consumption in BC dropped while it started to rise in the rest of Canada. So significant, meaningful impact. Fossil fuel taxes work. There's no question about it. They work. And nothing else works. Let me give you a couple of other data points I want to get into. So there was a comment here, why this is better. Why is it better? Well, one reason it's better is it's just more efficient. It's just, you don't have government, and I've been saying this too, and I was really glad to see this. This is from an interview last year, just very recently, at the Yale School of the Environment. This is a professor at the Yale School of Environment, and he's talking about why global carbon tax makes sense. And this is in response to Africa's call. Africa says, hey, let's stop with all the fossil fuel consumption. And the way you always can reduce consumption is you raise the price. Anything that costs more, people will demand less of it. We always went through that supply-demand curve. So this professor there, and he makes the point, and I've been saying this forever. So I guess I could be a little irritated that I say it, but nobody pays attention. But when other people say it, if people pay attention, that's fine for me. So what he makes the point, it's not enough to subsidize clean energy. That doesn't solve the problem. With subsidies, we have to pick winners. And do you trust the government to pick winners? I don't know. I don't know who's the right manufacturer of solar panels. I don't know who should be building wind turbines. When you do cap and trade, you have to have these, bean counters come in and say, well, you emitted this much last year, so now you get to emit this much this year. With a fossil fuels tax, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. There's none of that. You pull your car up at the pump and you pay it. You deliver the natural gas to the power plant pays it. The coal, it's paid for at the plant. Wherever it's consumed, it's paid for. It's so easy. And you're not picking winners and losers. If we create a new source of cheap energy, solar, wind with subsidies and the like, because subsidies do reduce prices. We already saw that from the supply and demand curves. So yeah, subsidies reduce prices. Then we'll just have more cheap energy. We'll just consume more. We'll consume more clean energy, but we'll keep consuming the dirty stuff too, only by making it more expensive. Much, 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 much more expensive. And again, this is so much more efficient because the revenues that we pay in are returned to poor, struggling, working people in a way that leaves them better off than they were beforehand. And the market responds by saying, wait a second, we can make enormous gobs of money if we can figure out the most efficient ways to produce and distribute clean green energy. This is the ideal. This is the Holy Grail. No need to look any further. You want to solve the climate crisis? Governments need to implement a fossil fuels tax. Now, all the other alternatives stink. They're just not good enough. They're not even close. I thought this was really interesting. This is from, is it 2008? I'm not even sure what year. Let me see if I can get the year. Okay, so this is from The Atlantic, which is, kind of a neo-lib rag. 2012. The three Green Party candidates and their disappointing platforms. Connor Friedersdorf, 2012. So this was kind of, I guess, the beginning of the Green New Deal. And Friedersdorf offers sort of a mixed, support. He says, Jill Stein's Green New Deal is far and away the most deeply thought out platform on offer, and its silkins is largely of assertions of the utopian ends it'll achieve rather than realistic means for getting there. Exactly right, which is the same as Paris 21 or Paris 16. Paris 2016 tells us we've got to cut back our consumption. We got to, be zero neutral by 2030. In other words, whatever we pump into the atmosphere is taken out by trees and the like by 2030 or sequestered, what have you. We can't be having net positive emissions. And of course, we still have enormous sums of emissions right now. But it's aspirational. It doesn't tell you how to get there. There's nothing in Paris 2016 that tells us how to get there. This criticism of the Green New Deal by the Green Party, which I support, is spot on, 100%. It's a bunch of assertions of utopian ends, no realistic means how to get there. And Friedersdorf, proves the point by quoting from it. And it's just a bunch of gobbledygook, right? Sustainable green economy, 21st, adopting green technologies, it's sustainable production. How? A World War II scale mobilization. So think of that. And Friedersdorf is mocking this. Look, we're going to have to put 16 million people working full time like during World War II. Guess what? The fossil fuels tax takes care of all of that. You don't have to have the government hire all these people to work in different clean green energy plants. The fossil fuel, the tax will cause the economy to shift, and very, very quickly, because the profits will be drained out of fossil fuels. The consumption, the production will drop. The profits will be drained out, and the alternatives will become that much more appealing. And it will all happen largely, not completely. I want to be, I've been saying, it'll be fine. Working people won't suffer. Well, there will be pain. There will have to be belt tightening. A couple of thoughts on that. One, although on balance, working class people will be better off because they consume less per capita than rich people. There will be rural residents. There will be people who, people who do lawn work, right? There are certain industries that are very fossil fuel intensive, and there may or may not be ways to avoid, to substitute quickly. And we will have an absolute obligation as a society to address those needs, those people, to make sure that they can transition to a clean green economy. And if they can't transition, then they have enough that they are able to live a decent quality of life. But just not the same way they were living before, not a carbon-intensive life. I just want to make one other point. One of the great things about the fossil fuels tax is it so strongly incentivizes local production. One of the reasons that we offshore is because transportation costs are so low as a direct result of cheap energy. It's really cheap to ship a giant container across the Pacific Ocean in a filthy diesel spewing container ship. That's really cheap. So you don't spend a whole lot to bring the goods that are made with cheap foreign labor at $1 an hour or less if it's Bangladesh or less if it's Sri Lanka, or less if it's Haiti. You don't have to spend very much to bring the goods over or back to the United States, and you paid almost nothing to have them made in the first place. But if you have that fossil fuels tax, suddenly it's much more expensive to transport the goods, and the incentive is to make them here where there's much less transportation costs, much great incentive to manufacture food locally. Small local farms will become more competitive. There's just no question this is the answer. I always am just astonished that people just don't. But look, people don't accept that Israel's a genocidal state either. I mean, there are a lot of things that are clear, and yet it's so hard to get people to see them. But we don't have time. We don't have the luxury of not seeing it at this point. So I made the point that we're not seeing enough, right? I extol the Canadian system, but it's not good enough. Why isn't it? Well, it's simply because the tax isn't high enough. We need they need a higher tax on gasoline. Right now, it's 9 cents per liter, and that's 9 Canadian cents. So I'm going to get into what that is exactly. I will go through the details here. 242425646 if you want to join me. So 9 cents per liter. So what's a liter? That's the first question I had to ask myself. What is a liter? So 1 liter, we use gallons here, 3.78541 liters in 1 liquid gallon. So 9 cents a liter, and that's Canadian cents, which adds another fly in the ointment. So here's all the math for you. 9 cents times 3.785, I did round it. It's about 34 cents per gallon gas tax in Canadian currency. It's somewhat meaningful. But the exchange rate now, and it's funny because the Canadian dollar used to be stronger than the American dollar not that long ago. Now it's much weaker. 25 cents per gallon in American currency. Nothing. I mean, it's not de minimis, but it's not meaningful. The actual price, is what people focus on, right? Not the tax. In the end, you look, when you're buying your gas, the thing you think about is what you actually pay. And in Ontario, it's $1.66.5 Canadian per liter. And if you, again, going through the math, we'll go through all the math right now. Let me transition that. That turns out to be about, they pay about $4.60. Because it's 1.665 times 3.785 to get the price in Canadian per gallon, and then change that into American, and it's $4.60. So they pay about $1 more a gallon. What it comes down to about $1 more, because there's other factors besides just the tax that cause the price to be somewhat differential. That's nothing. $4.60 gallons, it's like still, it's about $9-10 a gallon in Europe, which isn't nearly enough either. One of the phenomena of gas prices, and this is not true for all energy, by the way. This is really interesting. I was doing a lot of research. I really wanted to understand this. I'm trying to put together an article. I'm hoping to get in the Washington Post at some point, so we'll see if I can do that. It's a lot of work, but did a lot of research on this stuff just in the past few days, try to understand as best I could. And this is from Wiki Invest, which I thought did a real nice, clear job here. One of the striking features, or they say the most striking feature of the oil market, is the low price elasticity of demand. What that means is the price elasticity means a large rise. You need a large rise in price or drop in price to meaningfully impact on how much the consumer will demand. Because people need the car to drive, right? They're using they don't buy gasoline as a whim. It's not like, oh, I see those potato chips. They're on sale, I'll buy them. When your car's empty, if you have a gasoline guzzler or gas car, you have to buy it. It's cold, you turn on the heat. But it's oil, it's petroleum that's the most impervious to price changes. And there's a lot of impacts, there are a lot of things that factors that flow, or a lot of subsequent impact, results or things that result from that. And one is that when there is a shortage or when there's a glut, the price changes very significantly, because people will pretty much keep consuming the same amount unless the price goes way up, and then they will really drive less. We saw that in California when the price went over $5 a gallon when I was living out there. People really did drive less when the price went above $5 a gallon. And, you see it when, OPEC is, producing as much as it can. You can see price per barrel drop below $40 a barrel. And we've seen prices under $2 a gallon in this country. So you see major shifts in the price of gasoline based on just changes in supply, whether more or less. How do you address that? It really disrupts the economy. So how do you address that? Well, real high price that's added by the government would mean that supply changes aren't going to impact the price at the pump very much. There's a glut, prices won't drop that much because most of the price you pay is based on that tax. Suddenly there's a shortage because Russia's in a war with Ukraine and they're not producing as much oil, so there's a shortage. Price doesn't go up that much, percentage-wise, because most of it is what you're paying in that tax anyway. So it's less disruptive to the economy when there are changes in the supply. It's just, in all ways, the right answer. This I thought was very, very interesting. Yes, if we want to cut consumption of petroleum, which is used to drive cars, except for like electric vehicles, obviously, we're going to need relatively sizable tax. That's not as true for other forms of fossil fuel energies. They make the point that, for example, and this was a really interesting one, when it comes to making electricity, there are lots of different ways of making electricity. You can use natural gas plants, you can have solar-powered energy plants, you can have wind-powered. All those are options. So when we raise the price of coal used to make electricity, natural gas used to make electricity, oil also used to make electricity, when we raise their price, the demand for these alternatives will go up very significantly. And that means the market is going to fill it. Solar generators are going to, solar panels are going to be coming online more and more. Big wind turbines, offshore, all of that. One of the big arguments we're having right now, the Biden administration is getting excoriated. Oh, you talk about you want clean energy, but you want to put tariffs on solar panels, and the solar panels from China are cheaper. Well, it's true. Those two important considerations are at loggerheads. A clean, green economy would benefit from cheap solar panels from China. But full employment with decent wages for working people would benefit from making the panels in the United States, but because they're more expensive, they're less likely to be implemented, especially by industry that is looking solely at what's the cheapest, most efficient way I can generate kilowatts. So how do we cut through that Gordian knot? It's real simple. Simply raise the cost of the alternative to the clean green alternative, the clean green energy. We raise the cost of fossil fuels, and we can have our cake and eat it too. Make the solar panels in this country, pay workers a decent wage, and there will still be demand for them because the dirty oil alternative is more expensive. Again, I can go through this over. There's just so many perfect examples, so many reasons this is the right answer. But at some point, it's like, I've already made my point. I've made it clear. It's concise. as concise as I can be, we need a fossil fuels tax. And on that note, I will be back tomorrow, hoping to have Liz Croydon with us, and you have a great afternoon.